I think it's a little different than an add-on. They're saying that someone, we do reflect, now we finish and now we do reflections. Like it's integral is I think where they were going. However, I think you're right. Sometimes you go forward, you go back, you do it in lots of different directions. Yes, Kim.
Not necessarily the judged aspect, but I think in terms of using it as an assessment tool to assess the learning, if it needed to be part of the learning experience where something was being graded, I think you could use it as a tool to gather information to assess the depth of the learning, what wasn't necessarily comprehended by the way they're reflecting on it. So you can see if they misunderstood a concept, or if they were misusing vocabulary, or if they were the way that they were not reflecting with others. You can assess a lot of different social, emotional, affective, type learning, but not necessarily judging it, and it doesn't have to be graded, but that's how I heard it.
Okay, so I agree with Kim, except for the one part where I would never grade it, but I would use it to gather information as a teacher so I know best how to move and how to help that young child or an older child. However, I still choose not to grade it. I do know people who grade reflections. I personally would avoid grading reflections, because then again the student's trying to please me and get a grade, and that changes it very dramatically. However, everything else she said I agree with, like in flying living clothes. Everybody hear what she said? Okay. Any other point of view someone would disagree with? Yes?
Yeah, it says reflections of question. I think, sometimes it could be many other things rather than just a question.
Right, it can be a question. I think that was implied. It could be a question, like you might say, in fact, it's a great way to do a reflection. Say, come up with 3 questions you have as a result of this. Think about it, reflect on it, come up with a few questions. So it's a manner of reflection, could be questioning. It's not the only way to do it, but it's a good way to get that going. Yes?
I think it can potentially be time if you're trying to get somebody even to buy into the idea of reflection. So we spent those 2 minutes only and we still learned a lot.
Right, so I definitely think timed and untimed. Just like reflection is formal and informal. Sometimes it's formal. We're going to take time right now and do a reflective experience. Or we're on the bus coming back from somewhere and we just throw in a quick informal kind of reflection just because it's there. Or it just starts happening and you don't even plan it. All of a sudden you realize, wow, we just did a reflection. We just didn't even know it. We just reflected on something. So it's formal and informal. It's timed and untimed depending on the situation. Anything else? Yes?
I don't know if it necessarily always be empowering. Depends on the context.
Sometimes it's just enlightening. It's not always empowering. So again, it might be empowering. So some of these are things that it could be. Did you have a comment to make also?
It says reflection is collaborative, which might mean it's not personal. But then later it says it's personal, which might mean it's not collaborative, and in fact it's both.
It is both. So it's personal. The reason I would let collaborative stay up there is they say reflection is always improved when you get feedback, when there's an exchange, where somebody responds to it. And in that sense, reflection is best when there is that opportunity for a collaboration or response. Though it's also, the word collaborative might seem that it's always done as a group, and reflection can be individual. All right, I'm going to go through and see if there's a couple of others that, they said it's not immediate. It can be, I wasn't sure about what that one meant, but I think it can be right in the now, and it can be while we're in action, while we're doing something. So if we're in the middle of sorting food for a food bank, we could say, wait a second, let's think about what we're doing. Just take a moment. Is there a way we could do this differently? What are you noticing here? So you can stop and do a moment of reflection right where you are. In fact, it's a great way to do it right where you are. And then you resume what you were doing. So you can put that little pause button and keep reflecting.
Well, yeah, I'd add to that. I wasn't sure what immediate meant either. It could be superficial, but the best part of reflection is that in the process you have to be present. So whether it's immediate or later, it moves you into the presence of your experience.
Lovely. Moves you into the presence of your experience. And it's very interesting. Can reflection be done silently or noisily? We're on the sound spectrum. Anywhere on the sound spectrum. All right, in terms of what it is, all right, I think we've got a very good list here. As long as we realize these are ands rather than ors. Do you know what I mean? And that we look at these in very open terms. And I really like that someone said it's not a punishment, but in very many places, reflection is seen, oh, now it's time for reflection. Have you ever heard kids react that way? Right. So we need to change the onus of reflection to be something that's exciting, and that students see it as something for them, not because that it's like, now it's always one more thing for me to do. We want it to become something I want to do. We need to move reflection from I have to I want to. And that's what we're going to talk about in terms of different modalities. But one of the ways I like to look at it is with the multiple intelligences. When we look at them, we have a linguistic, using words, logical, mathematical, bodily, kinesthetic, spatial, musical, interpersonal, intrapersonal, naturalist, and existential. So you have that on your list. So just take a moment, take a list. I'd like you to take a moment and check off which of these modalities you think I could figure out reflection using that modality. Check off the ones that would come easily to you. Which ones seem kind of easy when you look at them? Who saw one that's pretty easy up there? Linguistic. Which one? Bodily, kinesthetic. How many of you thought kinesthetic would be difficult? That's one that always, raise your hand high if you think it'd be difficult. You know, kinesthetic, we're going to do some kinesthetic ones soon. What's another one that could be difficult? Musical. How many people saw musical as challenging? For some of us. How many of you think musical would be easy? See, I figured with different ways. So that's one thing to notice, is that for some of us, one is more difficult and some of us it's easier. So what does that tell us that we should be doing when we're thinking about reflection?
Provide different types.
Provide different types, and how are we going to figure it out? By ourselves or collegially? And if we get stuck, who are some of the best people to determine what to do for reflection? The students. The students. The purpose of reflection is not just to have students be reflective, but to have them lead reflection, so that they develop the skill set to design the manner which they want to reflect. That's actually where we're leading. We're just modeling different modalities until they get there, and then our job is to get out of the way so they can go ahead and do it. Right? So we're going to look at different ways to do reflection using these modalities. And we're going to try some that are a little bit tricky. And I'm going to give you some challenges. All right, everybody good so far? Everybody getting some ideas? Anybody have any questions so far? How many of you hate reflection? No, I'm joking. I've been told that. I've had people say in my workshops, I hate reflection. Anybody here in that zone? Anybody hate reflection? Be honest. Oh, good.
How about dislike instead of hate?
What was that?
How about dislike instead of hate? Hate's
Okay,
strong.
how many of you how many of you are not a fan of reflection? Raise your hand if you're not a fan of reflection. Okay, good, honest people. We've got a couple. We'll see if by the end, your are two measures, okay, to see if we transform it. All right. It reminds me when I first taught in an independent school that's not present in the room here today, so I couldn't tell the story if they were. The first day of my job, some students came up to me and said, "Are you a feeling teacher?" The word feeling had been so overused and used improperly that people didn't like that. I did not use that word for 2 solid years. I made sure it was repeated. But reflections like that can be misused and misrepresented, so people think it's something to shy away from rather than to move towards. We need to reframe how it was. All right, so let's play with some reflective ideas. So which ones do you want to start with? Let's do a fun one first. Let's do naturalist. How many of you are tricked by the word naturalist? How many of you weren't sure what that is? Could you raise your hand if you weren't? Okay, so, Howard Gardner's the one who developed these multiple intelligences. At first he had 7, and then he added the last 2 to confuse us. I'm sure of it. He added existentialist and naturalist at the end. How could you do naturalist reflection? Everybody at your table, literally, you've got literally a minute to see if you come up with any idea. Take 1 minute to see what you come up with, and then I'll give you an example. But I want you to come up with an idea first. And I heard some good ideas. I heard several tables say, take it to the parents. Parents text and drive, am I right? So I heard take it to the parent body. Where else could they take it? Where else what were the other ideas? Yes?
Do a YouTube video or a website and get it global.
Get a YouTube video or a website to take it global, yes.
DMV.
DMV, maybe have a display, a video, handouts, posters, all of the DMV. Anywhere else? Yes.
I heard of a group that made bumper stickers called "I'm not textually active while driving."
Oh, that's adorable. Oh, I love it. So use humor to catch people's attention. See, humor is great, because she remembered that. How many of you will remember that? And that's so easy to remember, right? So another idea, which I would have loved for them to do, is to make a public service announcement for the radio stations. Why radio stations? Kids are listening to them while texting and driving. Get the local DJs to go on record to say, hey, if you're texting and driving, stop it right now. Could they do that? Would kids love working with DJs, right? When you're a resident kid, you have to help me out with that.
Yeah,
Be really cool, see? So we can take the ideas and extend them, and that's what we want to do with service learning. It doesn't end. Service learning is not a project. Let me dispel that. It is not project-based learning. It's service learning. It's much more than project-based learning because it includes youth initiative, voice, choice, and reflection. These are students capturing history. Every community has a story that must be told and must be captured. In this case, these are students who interviewed elders in their community who had served in a war, anywhere in the world, or been affected by war. And so then they create displays and invite the seniors in to be part of the storytelling. So they honor them, they witness their stories. Who benefits from this? Everybody. We're all lifted up by this learning. Now, I'd just like to show you, I mentioned before about literature, I wanted to show you an example of how that works. These are 3 books that you could use if you were doing something around this kind of an issue. Love Lizzie, Letters to a Military Mom. It's a story about a girl writing letters to a mother in the military. So what would that lead the class to do? It's pretty easy, right? Then you have Truce, which is a non-fiction book about World War I, with soldiers from France and Germany were fighting in France, World War I, and it's Christmas time. So they made a truce for one night, Christmas Eve. And the French and the German soldiers could hear each other singing Christmas carols around their respective fires. And they moved closer. And they moved closer till they sat around one fire. And they shared food and stories and photographs of their family, and they refused to go back to war. This book is amazing. There's also videos and films about this. Does this relate to bullying on a school campus? I think so. I mean, you can take these stories and go so far with them. They did eventually go back to war 3 months later on fear of being executed. People having to be executed for, if you think of it, this is an amazing book. And then you have Walter D. Meyer's extraordinary novel, Sunrise Over Fallujah, about a boy from Harlem serving in Iraq. He just tells it like it is. So you have fiction, nonfiction, and picture books that all compel us to want to get engaged, to learn, to want to read, but also to want to take action. I'd like to take you to Hong Kong Academy. I put this one in there for you, Elaine. Is that great? You didn't know that. That was a surprise. Okay, this is an international school where 7th and 8th grade classroom decided that while they were going to be meeting their curricular objectives, they were going to do it in a different way. They did a study of their school. They studied how much coal, bus fuel, water, waste, and copy paper were generated by their school in 1 year. Would that be an interesting study? Think of all the learning you would have to do, all the people you'd have to connect with, all the interviews you would conduct, all the paperwork you would have to go through, all the bills you might have to consider, all the numbers you would have to crunch to come up with real understanding of the use of our natural resources for one school. Would this be academic learning? Then they had to put it together in a report. The report, if you can't see, please move that paper there. They put it together in a report which looked like a consulting firm came in and you spent $50,000 pulling it off, but it was done by students and it has a sense of humor. So for example, they concluded that their entire use of carbon emissions from all these uses made 578,000 kilograms of carbon output, which is the mass of 76 adult elephants. I don't know how they figured that out or why, but I certainly think it's memorable. They figured out how many trees they would have to plant. They would have to plant 3,400 trees to offset this amount of emissions. And then the report just kept going and going and going. Isn't that amazing? You're 7th and 8th graders doing this work. Are they excited to go to school? Are they doing something that matters? Then they had to do a presentation for the board at their school, and they got them all convinced to make the changes they proposed. Now, when you do something like that, if you finish a normal paper, you're glad it's over, am I right? I'm so glad it's over. When you finish this, what's the question you ask? What's next? You're ready for action. You want to do more. You want to learn more. That's how we create self-generated learners. Let's talk about the little ones. This is Rachel Brunson's classroom, and this is not Rachel Brunson. This class was studying water.